Okay, everyone, welcome. First, we're going to talk about the history of voting. It's a short presentation, give you a history of the voting rights.
In this scene from the 2012 movie, Abraham Lincoln spells out the terms of Reconstruction.
All they heard was the first time any president has ever made mention of Negro voting.
In 1865, he said freed slaves who were intelligent or had served as soldiers should be allowed to vote. The 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, guaranteed this right as part of the full citizenship accorded to African American men. But for much of the 20th century, voting remained a contentious issue. The 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, gave women the right to vote, but the racial divide remained. Some states continued to limit voting, either through measures like the poll tax or direct intimidation of African American voters. In the South, there were even whites-only primaries. This is Sam Tannenhouse of the New York Times. The first modern Civil Rights Act was signed by President Eisenhower in 1957. It created a federal commission authorized to enforce voting rights. Senator Strom Thurmond conducted the longest filibuster in history, more than 24 hours, in an effort to thwart the bill, but it passed.
The location for the meeting with Senator Ritterhoff.
Still, voting was not equal for all. Massive resistance in the Deep South was organized to keep blacks from the polls, and legal enforcement was hampered by all white juries. Voting rights became a central issue in the civil rights movement.
I think this march will go down as one of the greatest.
In 1965, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. led the march from Selma to Montgomery for better voting laws. The nation was shocked by images of the marchers being attacked, and less than 5 months later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It barred states and districts from curtailing the vote on the basis of race, color, or language.
It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country.
Sections 4 and 5 of the bill included special provisions to ensure fair voting practices in a number of states, most of them in the South. Voting rights advocates say some citizens there continue to be disenfranchised, but the Supreme Court's close ruling on Tuesday, striking down Section 4, suggests the conditions have changed since 1965, and it is left to Congress.
Look, right now, while you look at this on your screen in your hand or on your computer, there's somebody just like you who's sitting in a prison cell. And they didn't do much more than you did, some crazy weekend. You didn't get caught. They got caught, and they can never get uncaught. The United States of America is now the #1 incarcerator of human beings in the world, in the history of the world. We have about 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prisoners. We have more people locked up than China. China, who has 1 billion people, they got fewer prisoners than we do. A lot of times people say, well, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. Really? Have you ever committed a crime? You got people who are doing more drugs on college campuses, in yacht clubs, country clubs. We all know that's going on, but the SWAT team never shows up there. The SWAT team shows up in housing projects where you have poorer people doing fewer drugs, and those people go to prison. But think about it. What if one of the times when you were breaking the law, when you had something illegal in your pocket, in your car, in your party, the police had kicked in those doors? Would you want to be known for the rest of your life based on what happened that night? That is what is happening to millions of people. If rich folks' kids get in trouble, they go to rehab. Poor folks get in trouble, they go to prison. And you spend $100,000 per year per kid to lock a kid up, when you could have spent a fraction of that and turned them into a NASA scientist, turned them into a fashion icon. When people come home from prison, they're not given the opportunity to start over. You leave a physical prison and you go into a social prison where you can't get a job, you can't get a student loan, you can't rent an apartment. How are people supposed to start over? And what happens to neighborhoods when you take a disproportionate number of people out for minor offenses and you send them back home with no hope and no opportunity? There are no more excuses to have this horrible system continue when there is now finally bipartisan agreement that it is a tragedy to do this. Not only do you have President Obama and the Democrats, you now actually have people like Paul Ryan, Koch Industries, Newt Gingrich, all saying the same thing. We are locking up too many people. We're wasting too much money. We're wasting too much genius in America, and it's time to do something.
Okay. Apologize for the mishap on video. I was trying to multitask, check the chat box at the same time. When I did that, it paused a couple of videos. Sorry about that. Okay.
Look, right now,
Just a reminder, some important dates coming up. You have to wait until January the 15th. You can register now. Also, depending what state you vote from. For example, I'll vote from Texas. So I can register by the 2nd and 3rd of this month, which I did already. So take action now, and don't forget to register to vote from overseas. And we'll put the link vote from abroad in the chat box shortly, so you have access to. And just remember, the deadline to register from overseas is January the 15th. But don't wait now. Let's do it today. Let's be proactive than reactive. Okay. Now, where you can find us online is very simple. For Democrats Abroad, Black Caucus, you can have any questions about the voting or any kind of social inequality or justice inequality. Feel free to contact us at Black Caucus at Democrat Abroad, our website, Facebook page, Twitter account, Instagram, and also we have broadcasts available on iTunes, Spotify, and all type of media out there that you can find us on. More information about the Black Caucus. Okay. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Jay. Let me stop this for a second. Okay. Jay is a social media consultant, a former national labor union rep, executive officer, and a hip hop artist who performed under the stage name Timid. Jay is currently the co-chair of Black Lives Matters Tokyo, an organization that educates on racism and discrimination. Black Lives Matter Tokyo mission is to strengthen and the ties with the Japanese community through anti-racist action, community outreach, effort education on Black history and the history of racism and discrimination to move towards a more culturally diverse and understanding environment for all. Without further ado, here's Jaylon Carter.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. I just want to give a brief rundown of our group and what it is that we do and what it is that we've been doing out here in Japan. I know it might seem a little odd to have Black Lives Matter organization in Japan, but yeah, we've had some good successes. So let's see, hopefully you guys can see my screen.
Yes, Jay.
So we started Black Lives Matter Tokyo. This iteration started around the time of the protests that were going on in the States about what happened with George Floyd. And it started with a college student by the name of Sierra Todd, and she was a Temple University student and wanted to do something to get involved with the movement that was happening in the States back home. And so she planned a solidarity march, got some friends together. They expected roughly about 100 people, but about 3,500 people showed up. And so there was a lot of support from not only Americans and Black Americans, but from Japanese people and other foreigners living in Japan. And so it was a pretty resounding success. And in the wake of that, a lot of people wanted to get involved. They wanted to participate. They wanted to do something. And so several projects sprung up out of that march and out of that participation. And here are several that we worked on. We had immediately in the aftermath, we did a webinar to kind of explain what Black Lives Matter was, what the movement was about, and what was going on in the United States, because people in Japan don't have that history or context, and they were getting it from media. And sometimes we know media doesn't always deliver the proper context for it. And so we did a live webinar. We had several hundred people in attendance, and which showed that there was an interest in what was going on in the States and this kind of history in Japan. And from there, we continued with several other webinars with different topics, and I'll go over some of those in a second. We also put together, and you see in the bottom left here is Koku Zine, which was a physical zine, which was highlighted the artistic artwork or poetry or whatever of Black creators living in Japan. And that was a project that we put together and sold to raise funds to help move some of these other projects. We also put together Harmonic Wavelength, which was originally intended to be a live music event, but due to changes with Corona, we moved it to a live streaming event. And this was Black artists, music artists living in Japan, and Japanese artists who were involved in doing typically Black genres of music. And so just to show that there was this connection between the cultures and that we can have this mutual appreciation for each other. And so with Real Talk, as I mentioned before, this was originally a webinar, then we moved into a web series. It was more about educational series to explore topics around racism, systematic injustices that were occurring in the United States and some of the history, but also to be able to relate that to the reality in Japan as well. Instead of being more dogmatic about it, to try to point out flaws in, the Japanese system or whatever, just to show these types of examples and to give this type of education. So we did one on anti-Blackness in media, which included blackface and cultural appropriation versus appreciation, which people may not be aware, Japan has had an issue with blackface throughout history. Even in modern times, at times there will be TV shows where comedians will show up in blackface. And there's always, a little bit of a pushback from some of the foreign residents in Japan, and then people in Japan who don't understand what the big deal is. And so we, in this webinar, we kind of broke down what the history is of it, and that it actually came from the United States by way of, one of the Commodore Perry, who came over to open up Japan's borders forcefully. And this was his favorite form of entertainment. And he taught it to the Japanese, and then they carried on with it, didn't think much of it. So we went on to those things and then highlight some voices of mixed race Japanese and Black people living in Japan, because there's also a question in Japan being so homogenous of what is real Japanese. So some mixed race people will face certain types of discrimination when living in Japan, even if they were born and raised here as well. So we explored these type of topics with the Real Talk series. Also, we do some educative posts and things through our social media. These are some examples of some posts that we do on our Instagram, which is BLM Tokyo. You can see we've talked about things like hate speech laws in Japan, microaggressions, and one of the recent ones about the anti-Asian violence in the US, because some of the information that was coming out to Japan was what was being seen in the media, that which was a lot of videos of Black people perpetrating this violence, which in reality was not the case. It was 75% of white people, primarily white males, that were perpetrating this violence against Asians in America, but the reporting was showing majority of Black people. And so we've also talked about hip hop and the roots that it has in the Black struggle, because hip hop is very huge in Japan, the culture around hip hop, the dress, the dance, all of that. So these types of things to kind of educate the public on what it is, and mainly to show, like in this one with the hip hop, is to show that there is this connection, that there's not this doesn't have to be this adversarial sort of relationship, and there's nothing to really be afraid of. So these are the types of things that we bring to the table, and the types of things activities that we like to carry out, more of an educational nature. Here's some of our links here, our Black Lives Matter Tokyo organization. This is also the website is in Japanese and English. The videos that we've done are also in Japanese and English. We have a team of volunteers that have helped us with a lot of different projects, not only Japanese, but people from other countries as well. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
If you have any question, please put star in the chat box and raise your hand.
Oh, thanks for putting the links in the chat.
Okay, Jay, I have one question for you.
Sure.
Can you talk more about the states between BLM, US versus Tokyo? The reason I ask this
Sure.
question is because I do have friends in the APAC region, because they keep saying, why BLM did not get involved Black on Black crimes, They always, when the police do something wrong, we'll get involved in that area.
Right. Well, the difference, I think there's two questions there. So the difference, quickly, the difference between the BLM Tokyo and our organization and BLM in the States, one, we're not affiliated with that organization. It's more, the name of this organization is from the movement of Black Lives Matter. And there are very different set of circumstances that, Black Americans or Black people in general living in Japan will have than in the States. There is some, the issues with police, but that's more of a foreigner type of thing, not necessarily specifically Black. But there are some things like stereotypes and caricatures and these types of things that happen. If you go through and look at some manga, especially some of the older manga, there'd be like the big lips and that whole type of caricature of Black people. And so the idea is more that there should be some education about it to let people know why people are upset about it, why this might not be a good thing, instead of being very dogmatic about it, because they don't have that history by and large. They don't learn about slavery and Jim Crow, and really we wouldn't expect them to, because it's not their history. Nobody in the States knows about Nobunaga or the Reconstruction period in Japan, because it's not it's not our history, it's not our culture. So an educative approach is definitely something that we think is a way to go. Now, as far as Black on Black crime and why BLM doesn't address that, well, that organization, I don't know, but Black on Black crime is actually a real misnomer, and it's really a kind of a dog whistle for racists to kind of point to why they can be against any type of activities that Black progressive organizations try to do, because we see that according to statistics that different groups commit crimes against that same group at pretty much the same rate across the board. So white people commit crimes against white people, Black people against Black people, Asian people against Asian people, and it's pretty much the same across the board. But we never hear about what's up with the white on white violence, what's up with the Latino on Latino violence. It's always specifically aimed at Black on Black violence to more or less make it seem like there's something wrong with us, that we're so much different, so other, and so much more violent and whatnot. So it's kind of it's a misnomer, really, misinformation as well.
Okay, great. Eric asked, for the link for the real talk.
Oh, yes, Real Talk. I'll put a link in there. It's on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel. But I'll put the link in the description.
I think Sarah Jean just did. That's correct, Sarah? Jean?
Yeah, sorry, I'm really fast with the links.
No worries. Yeah.
There we go. I got it right there.
Okay, great. Any more questions for Jay? Okay, if not, Jay can be reached at his email address posted in the chat right here. If you have any questions offline, please contact Jay about more information about BLM Tokyo. Okay, our next presenter is our very own Sarah Jean. And Sarah Jean is the DA chair of Japan. She's a long-time resident of Japan, and this is her first time as a national officer, but the organization of DA, but she organized DA events since getting involved in Democrats Abroad back in 2003. She served on most committees, organized Annual Women's March since 2017. She's a longtime activist she's a longtime activist and also a theater student got involved in anti-apartheid, took back the night, and the ACT up movement. At the ACT up movement. Sarah Jean is the lecturer at Temple University in Japan, at the Japan campus, and Sophia University, teach civil social in Japan, gender in Japan, and social movements in the U.S., and sustainability development as well. She's focused on nonprofit consulting on organization and skill development for those organizations. Sarah Jean?
Thank you very much, James. Sorry, I gave a very long introduction. Apologies to everybody for that. I'm going to talk about a few things. Thank you very much, Jazz and James, for inviting me today. I'm really happy to speak on the same panel as Jay from BLM Tokyo and Teresa, who's our expert. I'm going to just talk really simply and for a few minutes about voting rights, but really start off with DAJ, my why I do what I do, and some basic information. And then Teresa will tell you a lot more in detail. The mission of DA, Democrats Abroad Japan, is to make every citizen's voice heard by electing Democrats, influencing policy, and connecting people with each other. I'm not sure how many people online here today from Japan. My why I believe elections matter is, for whatever reason, since I was a small child, I've always believed it was important to, if you see a problem, to do something about it. And as I tell many people involved who love to complain, I believe that elections matter because it's really important that we put people in positions of power, unless we decide to run for office ourselves, that actually care about the same things that we do, that will make decisions in accordance with our priorities. For those of you who don't know, Japan has the 6th largest population of overseas citizens. Of this number, about 2/3 are civilians and about 1/3 are active military and or their families. And we see this as a big target for us moving forward. Voters in Japan, the number of people who actually vote in Japan is actually quite low, a little bit over the average of American citizens overseas, but we see this 8% as our real area to improve upon. We want, our real targets are registering more voters. We want to increase voter turnout. And we see the way to do that is by enhancing our reach and building our membership by working with different organizations in Japan, such as BLM Tokyo, such as other overseas member organizations, through coalitions, through collaborations, by holding collaborative events, and just being present publicly, which we hope to do more this year as the numbers of people with COVID until last week was really quite low in Japan. Well, we know what enhances voter turnout. We know what works. And streamlining voter registration, making voting more convenient, providing sufficient resources, restoring rights to formerly incarcerated people. But where we as overseas voters can really focus our efforts is investing in grassroots voter outreach efforts. And that's what we really want to do. As in the last one, civics education in schools. This is something I myself, as a person who teaches in an American institution, here as well as online overseas, has also been trying to focus on, but that's at a personal level. Teresa will tell us a little bit more about what we need to do, but I do want to just give a little overview of a few things. You know, voting, I'm sorry, I forgot who said this. Voting is being killed by 1,001 cuts. It's not one big cut because there's many small different little changes happening at different levels, at the state, municipal levels, and many different areas, from identification, voter registration methods, people who have been convicted of felonies, early voting, absentee voting, how ballots can be turned in, requirements, limitations on venues, times, and who controls voting, election, and voting procedures. According to the Brennan Center, since the 2020 elections, proposals to restrict voting rights have come up in 49 states, more than 400 bills. And we know that at least 19 states have enacted at least 33 laws, making it harder to vote. These are the ones in the various browns, oranges, and beiges. Okay, 20 states have passed laws making it easier to vote, but let's keep in mind that many more provisions to restrict voting laws have been proposed and passed. And that means that we have such a disparity across the country. Such big differences, everything from identification to voting policies. And this is from Stacey Abrams' website, just looking at the example of Georgia, voter purges. Voting list purges, people waiting in line, people being forced to cast provisional ballots, rejection of absentee ballots. We know that these restrictions impact not just who gets to vote, but even when votes are mailed in or submitted in person, which votes are counted. I want to just share two things from my own experience canvassing in rural Florida. In 2004, I organized a number of people living overseas, not just Japan, to go to different places in the US to work in rural areas. And we did really door-to-door canvassing. Just some of the impacts looking at early voting, venue and scheduling. This is just a picture of the venue where there was early voting. The time was limited, 9 to 5 in the city center, not easily accessible for low-wage workers, lower income people, people who rely on public transportation, and the times just did not fit most people's lifestyles except for retirees. Then even from the day of voting, our group worked in 3 low-income election districts. Just telling you a little bit about the precincts where we worked. 3 lower income, 2 of them more specifically African-American residential areas. Another one that was more Latino, low income neighborhoods. That the venues where we worked were really at the far edges of the district, not easily accessible by public transportation. The district that I was a poll watcher in, for example, the church where the voting was done was really not even in that district. Okay, it was kind of off, just outside the district, And I was working in a mostly African-American neighborhood. The voting location was actually in a predominantly white church where many people in the neighborhood were actually afraid to go to because of the situations in that community, or had never even gone there because the polling place, they were used to the polling place changing all the time. And frankly, without us going door to door and letting people know with a map where the polling place was, and we did not drive people, but other people, like in the backgrounds of these pictures, drove people to the polls because they were inaccessible. But also this changing of polling places on a regular basis was a big challenge. One other thing, to just talk about this specific polling place where I worked, people had to vote in 2 different locations for local elections and then federal elections, and this created great confusion. And I think that for every little thing, every little type of change will impact who can, who can't vote, and just whose votes get counted. And for anyone who's overseas thinking, who's on the fence about the importance of these off years, I want you to think about any particular issue that matters to you, whether it's about healthcare, whether it's about sexual health, whether it's about, and I'm using the example of Mississippi and Texas and abortion rights and healthcare for women. Think about that one issue that matters to you, and think about how that's going to impact how it's going down the ballot issues will be impacted by us staying at home. I just want to stop as I've just gone over my time, and I want to thank everyone. I'm happy to talk about how people can get involved and what are the big options for you to be part of our team. And thank you very much for giving me this time. I guess I will hand it over to Teresa. James, thank you.
James, your mic is off.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah Jean. If you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat box, and we'll address those questions after the last panelist. Okay. The next speaker is Teresa Ritterhoff. Okay, Teresa is a founding member of DA Wisconsinites Abroad. She holds a PhD in Comparative Literary Studies from Northwestern University and teaches at the University of Applied Science in Mainz, Germany. She votes in Illinois. Teresa lives in Wiesbaden with her husband, son, and dog Loki, all who are feminists. Teresa?
Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much for this invitation. And thanks to Sarah Jean for a great presentation. Just going to dig a little bit deeper into a couple of issues. I'm afraid I've been a little bit oversold as an expert. I'm just, like all of us, I think, on this call, a concerned citizen who believes that knowledge is power. And I love to have conversations like this with people like you, making sure that we all know what's happening and what we can do about it. So I'm going to share my screen. It doesn't look, there we go. Doesn't look like it's loading. There you go. I hope everyone can see that. Super. All right. So as I said, I just think the most important thing right now is that we know what to do in 2022. As Sarah Jean indicated, this is not an off year. This is one of the most important elections of our time, and we need to act accordingly, and we need to make sure that others do the same. So the more we know, the more we can share, the more likely it becomes that we rise to this challenge. So we need to know our rights. That's number one. We need to know them, we need to use them. These are the rights that protect us from overseas. WCABA and the MOVE Act, won't go into all the details, but we have provided the links if you'd like to read up on them. Bottom line, since the MOVE Act was passed, all 50 states are required to send us our ballots in electronic form, often email, sometimes downloaded from a website, but you will get it sent to you right away, 45 days before an election. And so once you register, once you go to votefromabroad.org, register/request your ballot, talk a little bit more about that later, you'll just get these ballots sent to you automatically. You don't have to worry about it, one and done. So you don't have to look at every day and see if there's a deadline coming up. You just get them. And, you know, given what Sarah Jean just showed us, we really have to say it's in a lot of cases, it is easier for us to vote from overseas than it is for people at home. So not to use that, right? Not to follow up on that obligation is, I think, something that's hard to defend. So what's important to understand, though, is that although our right to vote from overseas is a matter of federal law, all elections are administered at the state level. And so this is, we know this if we voted from abroad, because we know it has to pass through our local office and in our home state. So what kind of implications does that have? Well, for a lot of people, I think it means they stay at the federal level, they vote in federal elections, but they don't think as much about down ballot, as Sarah Jean has already mentioned. And actually, you know, we don't have two ballots. We have one ballot going all the way down if we make sure we get it. And let's talk more about that in a moment. This is just some basic civics. What are federal elections? What are state and local elections? Probably most of you know this, but we sometimes forget about these really, really important offices that are state and sometimes even municipal level. And some of these, the consequences for these elections are not only policy, but also governing the elections themselves. And that's what we're starting to see, crows really coming home, chickens coming home to roost in terms of election law in the United States. So these are the consequences that we need to think about. Who are our leaders at home? State legislatures are extremely powerful. Then policy, as Sarah Jean mentioned, the issues that really move us. A lot of those issues are decided at the state and local level. And then for us, even if we don't live there anymore, our voting rights, our voting access, election administration, these are all decided at the state and local level. And then there's just the matter of morale and furthering our democratic culture, having a civic culture, having conversations like the one that we're having right now. That's what democracy looks like. It's not a spectator sport. So another reason to think about down ballot elections is strategic as a party. Who really won in 2020? Well, we won at the federal level, but these were some headlines in November 2020. A down ballot, we did very poorly, and we are seeing the results of that right now. And just to, good news now, we can be the margin of victory. We have been the margin of victory in some really key races. In 2020 at the federal level, we helped put Biden in the White House. There's no question. We were part of the margin of victory in Georgia, and perhaps more importantly, Arizona, a state that was called early for President Biden, and I think really turned the tide in the narrative about who won that election that we're still battling for. And then Wisconsin was another state in which our votes put us over the top and put President Biden in the White House. As Sarah Jean already mentioned, since then, since 2020, At least 19 states have passed 34. I think one more has been passed in December, restricting access to voting, and more than 440 bills have been introduced. They're still at it, still trying to push through these extraordinary, absolutely unprecedented assault on our right to vote in the United States. Even the fact that laws are being passed, let's not even talk about voting rights, to suppress any right, laws being passed to take people's rights away rather than expand them, is a movement that and a trend that should concern us very, very greatly. The other side of the equation, or the other side of the same coin, really, are attempts at gerrymandering, redistricting, and election subversion, or I really prefer the term sabotage because that's what it is. So gerrymandering and redistricting, just a quick reminder, gerrymandering is the method of defining, it's really a special case of redistricting. So defining a district, setting the borders of a district such that they favor one population over another. And it gets its name from a politician in the 18th century. I think at the time the name was actually pronounced Gary and not Jerry. That's how it goes in history. Things get forgotten and corrupted over time. But you've all seen these sort of snake-like or crazy shaped districts that are set, with the intention of excluding certain voters and reducing the impact of their vote. And then election subversion or sabotage, that happens when state legislatures put people in place to actually administer the election who are no longer nonpartisan, but are actually named by the party in charge. And since this only happens in Republican governed states, we can say with confidence which party that would be. So we've seen Trump supporters installed in key positions that used to be held by nonpartisan, or at least named on a bipartisan basis. And they have made very public their intent to not accept results that don't go their way. So this is the situation. We are at a really perilous moment, and I don't say this to discourage anybody from voting. Quite the contrary, we need to step up and right these wrongs. And we have two proposals right now. Actually, two laws been passed by the House. We're waiting for the Senate to do their part. The Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We need both of these pieces of federal legislation that would provide protection to homeland voters in really an analogous way to the way our vote abroad is protected by federal legislation. So 57 years after the Voting Rights Act was passed, the one that we saw in the opening presentation, signed by President Johnson, 57 years later, we are overdue for some new federal legislation governing our right to vote, protecting our right to vote, expanding our right to vote at home. And let's be very clear, this is a matter of social justice. So I said before, voter suppression and election subversion or sabotage are really two sides of the same coin. They're trying to do the same thing with different methods. They both aim to allow aspiring office holders to choose their voters rather than the other way around. That's why they are anti-democratic. And both of them are also aimed, sometimes directly, sometimes less so, but both aimed at suppressing particular votes of non-white voters. And they are a clear reaction to the progress that has been made in the area of social justice. And they want to turn it around. That's nothing could be clearer. So this is the fight of our lives. I love this quote from Senator Raphael Warnock that we all helped send to Washington. Your vote is your voice, and your voice is your human dignity. It's really all on the line. This is not an off year. So with that said, just wanted to give a brief overview of some key races that are on the line this year. These Senate seats from these so-called swing states. I think when we talk about swinging, the swing we should think about is the swing from people's home to the polls. That's where we need people to show up. When we show up, we win. That's the only swing that matters. And these are some races we should all pay attention to. If one of these is your state or your district, please stay on top of it and stay in conversation with people you know back home. And then here's some down ballot races. Governor is a down ballot office. You need to have the full ballot in order to be able to vote for your governor. These are some states with some crucial elections this year, and then some other offices that are also worth paying attention to. Let's not forget the Secretary of State is often, not always, each state is different, the person in charge of election administration. Actually, we've seen the Republicans also move to strip the Secretary of State of that power when they don't like how they've behaved. For example, in Georgia, Raffensperger, who refused to go along with the Trump plan, has been stripped of his power to administer the election. But it goes all the way down: the mayor, school board, even dog catcher. And I put that in as a bit of a joke, but look, that is a democratic culture that exists not only in America. Italians can vote for the dog catcher in their village from wherever they are in the world, and they do. So how does it work? Starts by going to votefromabroad.org or FEAP.org, especially if you're military, that's the preferred venue, but we like to recommend votefromabroad.org. It also has very up-to-date information. And if you need any help, we are here. I put my own email address here if you want to reach out to me. Always happy to talk to you about these issues. So when you go there, what you'll be doing is you'll be filling out your FPCA, your federal postcard application from the days, again, another historical marker there, like gerrymandering, when this used to be an actual postcard. And so this is your ballot request, and this needs to be done every calendar year. So even if you are already registered, you need to go and do it again. If you're not registered, this will also be your registration. So it's both, but every calendar year it's your ballot request. And just a little nugget of information to pass along when you're talking to other people about this. This is not the same thing as an absentee ballot within the US. This is what gets you these federally guaranteed rights that we were talking about. That's why it's important to do it every year. And the January 15th deadline is more of a reminder deadline. Set a reminder in your calendar, please do. And when January 15th comes around, make sure you have already registered yourself, and maybe set a goal of getting someone else to register by January 15th. But if you meet people after January 15th who aren't registered, they can still do it all the way up in way late into the fall. So this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're going all year long, and we're not going to quit. The other acronym that's good to know is your LEO, your local election officer. You can find yours at votefromabroad.org and make friends with them. They're generally extremely knowledgeable, extremely helpful people. They appreciate you reaching out, and it's a good habit to get into. Who can vote from abroad? Just a quick overview. I think probably most of you know this. All US citizens, including dual citizens who are 18 or over on election day. So if you know people who are 17 now, but will be turning 18 by November, they can get registered. If you've never resided in the US and you're wondering if you can vote, very likely the answer is yes. Let's talk about that very briefly. So all states do allow participation in federal elections. The states I've listed here do not recognize a never resided category. That sounds like it's a contradiction, but there are two other categories, which are intend to return and return is uncertain. You can return even if you've never resided, if you have ties to the state. And these states here, all of these states listed here, will even allow you to vote in state elections without ever having resided there. If these are your home states, you can still get the full ballot, the down ballot. Some conditions apply on some states, but this is an option that is open. Now, in terms of getting that full ballot and that down ballot, all 50 states will send that ballot to voters who mark intend to return on the FPCA. And let me just say that an intention is an intention. It's not a plan. There's no time limit on it. It's simply a state of mind. And these states will all send out a full ballot, down ballot, even if return is uncertain. So a lot of people think they shouldn't vote, particularly down ballot, if they don't reside in the country. I hope that we've seen today that that argument doesn't really hold water, because it's our rights too that are on the line. Even though our right to vote is federally protected, the administration of it is run by the state, and they can make life very difficult. Back when Sarah Jean put up that map of the states, I thought we need a darker shade of brown for Texas. Texas has started to intervene. They've started to make things more difficult for voters overseas. They're not allowed to do that, but they're trying. And that is why the Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas and named overseas voters in the complaint, because our laws are protected. But don't let anyone tell you that you don't have a stake in state and local elections in the United States. You do. And in the end, you know, as the Italy example is meant to illustrate, it's a matter of democratic culture, who votes from where. Of course, it's also a matter of law, but we have the right. So what is democratic culture? It's what we make of it. It's what we do and the conversations that we have together. So I know Sarah Jean has some other suggestions to make about what we can do. This is my short list. Obviously, register to vote, request your ballot, talk to friends and family overseas, make sure they have a plan to vote. Needs to be a plan more than an intention. And talk to friends and family back home, same thing. For a lot of people, midterms are an off year at home as well. We need to remind people that that is not the case. Find some key races that interest you. I put your state in quotes because maybe there isn't a big race happening in your home state. You can adopt another race. You can adopt another state to be interested in, to talk about, to share news on, and get engaged. Join DA if you haven't already. And if you have, you might want to consider joining a state team. These again are some of the so-called swing states, and you don't have to be a voter from this state to join the team. But of course, if you are, that makes probably the most sense. Call your representatives, call your senators right now and tell them that you support this federal voting rights legislation and that you expect the same of them. And if they do support it, say thank you. If they don't, then maybe some other choice words are in order. We all as citizens, I think, should be following and supporting the work of the January 6th Select Committee. This is going to be very important that we see accountability for this assault on our democracy, and it's going to affect the midterms too. Most of all, we need to know our rights, and we need to use them or lose them. That's my final plea to you today. Do not cede this ground. Cede it for the future of American democracy instead. And there's a video here I'd like to share. Or Jess, can you share that for us? I think you can probably get it out quicker than I can. Thank you so much. Or I can,
Sure.
I can do it if,
I can, hold on.
okay, great.
Seconds.
I got a jazz you again. I posted the link.
Acquaintance be for God and
You can hear it.
Okay.
should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne will take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne.
On January 6, 2021, politics in America was left fractured as a sitting president incited insurrection in an attempt to overturn the will of the American people. Americans died as democracy was left bleeding and bruised at the seat of government, while lawmakers fled for their lives.
Old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne will take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne.
Okay, thank you. It was very informative, Teresa. Any questions for Teresa or Sarah Jean? No questions? Just a quick reminder about the January the 15th. For those that overseas, especially in the countries where that they have restrictions and bans on flights, just be mindful to get the registry of vote as soon as possible on voteabroad.org. The reason why, because some states require that you mail in the ballot. They will mail it back to you, or some states do by email. If your state do it by mail in, like for mine, for example, like Texas, because the mail is very slow from experience from 2020 election. Um, I registered beginning of the year. I received my ballot until October because of COVID, the pandemic, because the flight was restricted flying to the country. So be mindful of that, the country you live in, the restrictions. So best to do it early, especially have to do the mail in. Okay, no questions. Therefore, I'd like to thank Teresa, Jay, and special thanks to Shari Jean because she helped arrange to invite Jay to this event. I really appreciate it. It was very informative. And also thanks to Jasty as well from a global level. Jazz, want to say a couple words from the Global Black Caucus?
Yes, thank you very, very much, Jay, Sarah Jean, and Teresa, and also James for this really informative webinar that you've created. I hope that we inspired, or that you inspired many, many people to go out, register their ballot, and execute their fundamental right to vote. On behalf of Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus, I am wishing you a happy new year. May 2022 be filled with good health, joy, and above all, with endless love, and of course, with a lot of blue votes. My name is Jaylon Amor, Chair of the Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus, DPCA voting rep for Democrats Abroad Switzerland, and a Texas voter. And yes, I have already registered to receive my ballot for 2022. Why did I register only 4 days into 2022? Well, you heard that in the webinar. It is very crucial to get your ballot or get registered to receive your ballot as quickly as possible. As you know, and probably have heard on today's call, there's so much at stake this year. 34 US Senate seats, all 435 US representative seats, 46 state legislators and 36 state governorships are up for the grabs in November 2022. Offices where the decisions that impact your and your family's lives today, day-to-day lives are made. Offices where decisions on climate justice, reproductive rights, affordable education and healthcare, and so much more are made. Regardless of where you vote, may it be in Texas, Maine, or Arizona, I really do urge you to go to votefromabroad.org today and register to vote. Request your absentee ballot for the 22 elections. If you have any difficulties at all, please contact our help desk at Vote From Abroad. Voting from abroad is a federally guaranteed right for US citizens, including dual citizens, and it's our duty to show up and to get people in office. Again, that's votefromabroad.org. At Democrats Abroad, we set out to bring the elections and the issues closer to you so that you know who and what is on the ballot, and so that lawmakers stateside know about issues unique to you and the overseas voter. I'd also like to give out a big shout out to all our great volunteers, both on camera and behind the scenes, and let everyone on the call know that all of our Democrats Abroad teams would love to have your help. So please consider stepping up as a volunteer. We have a critical, and I really mean a very critical year in front of us with federal, state, and local elections. We absolutely must win. Losing is not an option. We really need you, and we really need all hands on deck. You have the possibility to be the future. Our volunteer link I will put into the chat box right there, or you could always message us at blackcaucus@democratsabroad.org. And please remember that as an all-volunteer organization, your donation goes a long, long way. Even a tiny donation means a lot to us. So please follow the link in the chat box as well, and we will be very, very grateful. But for now, there's nothing more to say. I hope that we all are inspired, motivated to get our votes out there. And again, thank you very much for joining in on today's call. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sarah Jean. Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Jay. And especially thank you, BLM Tokyo.
Also, I'll post the BLM Tokyo donation site on the chat box as well. With that, I will end the recording.